office hours. This is Anthony James Green, founder of Test Prep Authority. And for the next however long it takes, we're going to be going through all of your questions that you submitted over the course of the week. And I want to thank all of you who got in touch via email or social media and submitted your questions. And basically just do kind of a rapid fire fly through of all your questions. I'll answer them as best I can. And if there's anything that's not in my area of expertise, I'll be referring you to the people who will definitely be able to handle your questions. The entire time we're going through this, just so you know, on the right of your screen, there's a little Q&A bar. And at the bottom, you'll be able to put in your questions and I'll see them as you upload them. So I'll be able to get to every single question that's on your mind. So there's nothing too big or too small that I won't be able to handle over the course of the entire broadcast. And, if there's anything that's kind of a follow-up to something I've already discussed, feel free to tack it on. So with that in mind, why don't we start? And I'm going to go in no particular order, just sort of chronologically from the questions that I uploaded. So the first one is, because of the upcoming changes to the SAT, is it best to just stick with the ACT and wait until the new SAT is released in March of 2016? This is a really big question. A lot of people have been asking me. And my basic idea is this, that if you're planning on taking the SAT before March of 2016, then just study for the SAT as usual or the ACT, depending on which one is better for you. And we're going to get more into that later, which test is best for you to take. But the main idea is that if you're planning on taking the ACT or the SAT, and you're planning on doing it on March of 2016 or beyond, then you probably want to avoid the SAT altogether and just stick with the ACT, just because no one's completely sure what it's going to be like, how the grading is going to happen. If you're aware of sort of the snafu on the October SAT this year, the College Board didn't do such a great job of administering it. There was some weird stuff going on with grading. And so, if you're taking it that far out, I just stick with the ACT. But if you're going to be taking the SAT in the next year, it's just business as usual, basically. One other thing we'll get into which one to take later on, but while they've broadcast what the basic changes are going to be, you should pretty much just expect that it's going to be exactly the same thing as the ACT as far as content. There's a couple different changes because, of course, they want to maintain the brand, but they're going to be very similar tests. So that's the basic idea. And by the way, one other thing, you should probably start prepping for the SAT the summer after your freshman year. That's sort of the sweet spot. So if you're wondering when you should start prepping, the summer after freshman year, anytime before that is a little bit too early. And anytime after that, you should probably get started right away, just so you can get this process out of the way as quickly as possible. The next question is, what is the best way to find a right fit college for a student with a competitive application? This is a very broad topic. I actually wrote the book, Why You Get Rejected, which you can download some chapters of for free on Test Prep Authority to handle this, because applying to the right schools is about half the mix when it comes to a competitive college application. It's not just that you have to make a great application, it's that you have to submit it to the right people, right? The analogy I make in the book is pretty much that, if you're trying to date a girl and she really likes guys who are athletes and you're not an athlete, well, you could be a really awesome guy, but you're not her type. So finding the girl who you appeal to, and also, of course, who appeals to you, is just as important. And the same analogy goes for colleges. You really need to find some place that wants you and that you want, right? This is going to be huge because, if you're and you're applying to MIT, well, it's awesome that you're a genius creative writer, but of course, MIT isn't exactly the world's biggest creative writing program. That's not what they're known for. So you need to find a good match. So my short answer is go to testprepauthority.com, and I'll be providing these links later. Get the free chapters of Why You Get Rejected, and also read on testprepauthority.com for free The Ultimate Guide to College Applications, which has a lot of information on this. But the really big key is that you do your research. Honestly, it's really not a one-size-fits-all process. You need to find out all the colleges that you're potentially interested in. You need to talk to your advisor. You need to talk to everyone you possibly can. Learn as much about the colleges as you can. Talk to people at the college and figure out what they want. So it's not a simple answer because it's where you're going to be spending 4 years of your life. And you really need to be sure that you're finding someplace that wants you and your type of applicant. And more importantly, that you want to spend 4 years of your life at, right? I mean, if you're a dance major, then MIT probably is not going to be the ideal school. So make sure that not only you're a fit for them, but that they're a fit for you. That's way more important. The next question is, how predictive is a student's let me just record this. How predictive is a student's PSAT score of what they will score on the SAT? This is a Very big question. And one thing to know is that not really that predictive ultimately, but very predictive of where you are now. And what I mean by that is that when I took the PSAT, for instance, I got a god-awful score. I did horribly. And the reason was because I was not prepared for the SAT at all. I rolled out of bed. I think I was 10 minutes late. They let me in, and I had no idea what I was doing. I'd never seen the question types before, and I had something like a 50th percentile score. I didn't do very well. Then I got prepared. I did some pretty intense tutoring and prep on my own, and I ended up getting a 99th percentile score on the SAT. So the biggest thing to know about predictive qualities of the PSAT is that it doesn't show you where you're going to be, right? It's not destiny, but you have to prep between your PSAT and your SAT if you want to improve and get somewhere else. So if you take the PSAT and it predicts that you're going to get a 1700, then you're probably going to get around a 1700 on the SAT. That's about where you stand. However, of course, that doesn't mean that you're a 1700 student. The biggest thing I always try to tell people is that this test is not an intelligence test. It's not really how good you are at math or reading or writing or grammar or anything. It's just how good you are at taking the SAT and applying SAT type problems to this test on their time frame. So anyone can improve with practice. And if you get a PSAT score that's not where you want to be, start practicing as soon as possible. And just know that the PSAT is a great benchline or benchmark for where you currently stand. The next question is, do you recommend that students take both the SAT and the ACT, or that they concentrate their preparation efforts on only one test? And the really quick answer to this one is absolutely concentrate. You must concentrate. There's no point in studying for both. The good news is that they test very similar material, and in a lot of cases, they have very similar formats. So, if you're studying for SAT math, you'll get better at ACT math. If you're studying for ACT English, you'll get better at SAT writing. A lot of the material and a lot of the strategies do cross over. And the students who've taken my online SAT and ACT programs remark to me a lot that, the material is very similar. And that's because the tests in many ways are very similar. They require a lot of the same material and the same strategies with a few exceptions. That being said, their formats are very different. And you really want to find the one that's best for you and launch in. Some people say, should I try and get a good SAT and ACT score? And there's really no point in doing that. And the reason that that's pointless is that they both measure the same thing. How good are you at taking sort of a numerically based standardized test? So the analogy I always make is, you go up to somebody and you say, I'm 6 feet tall and I'm also 2 yards tall. Well, you gave them two different numbers, but you just told them exactly the same information. So, getting a 2400 on the SAT and getting a 36 on the ACT, they accomplish the same thing. Doing both, there's no one at the college who's going to say, whoa, I'm so bowled over by the fact that they took the time to take both of these tests and rocked them both. It doesn't matter. And remember that the SAT and the ACT have one purpose, which is to get your binder opened, right? They're not looking at your scores after the fact. They're looking at your scores right up front. So, they get applicant 3,497 and they say, oh, GPA, good enough. SAT score, good enough. All right, we'll check them out. Or, GPA, not very good. ACT score, not very good. Wham, right in the trash. So that's really all you need to know. You don't need to take both. And the way that you can figure this out most easily, so that we don't spend more time on this because there's a lot more questions to go, is go to testprepauthority.com and check out the SAT versus ACT guide. It's free and it'll show you exactly which one is best for you in kind of a step-by-step format. It's a pretty simple process. It takes 2 weekends to diagnose yourself, but there you have it. Pretty simple stuff. So next up is, how do you recommend students decide which schools to apply to and how many? And in particular, for a student who may not be able to afford the tuition, but who may not be able to qualify for need-based aid. So in this case, I would say I always recommend applying to a lot of schools. And by a lot, I usually mean about 8 to 12. That's sort of a sweet spot. And that sounds like a lot of work. It is a lot of work. But the biggest thing to understand is that college applications are a crapshoot. And I don't say that lightly. For instance, when I applied to school, I got into certain schools that were in the top 10 and flat out rejected from other schools that were below the top 60. Why did that happen? I have no idea. And so when people say to me, my son is 4.0 GPA, has nearly perfect SAT scores, he's the captain of the soccer team, he's going to get into Harvard, right? Say he might. I have no idea, or he's going to get into Vanderbilt, right? Which is a very, very good, but less competitive school. He might. I have no idea. I've seen students who I was pretty sure were locks for a certain school get flat out rejected. And I've also seen students who I didn't think were quite qualified for certain schools get in. So you never know. And this really goes to diversification, right? And I always recommend that you have 4 reach, 4 maybe, and 4 safety schools. And of course, things are so competitive today that there's no such thing really as a safety school, quote unquote. But there are schools, of course, that are less competitive than others. The thing is that when it comes to, by the way, safety schools, what you really want to keep in mind and reach schools is that it really comes down to more than anything else, your metrics. So if your SAT scores, for instance, are below a school's kind of 25-75 cutoff, right, which is 25% of students, only 25% of students get below a certain score, and they still get in. And these are usually recruited athletes, big donors, et cetera, people who have a lot of special connections, and only 25% get above it. So for instance, at a very competitive school, a 25-75 cutoff might be something like, for critical reading, 700 to 750. And that means that only 25% of the people who get in score below a 700, and only 25% of the people who get in score above a 750. Now, when it comes to safety versus medium versus reach, think about it this way. A safety school is a school where you are above their cutoffs in terms of both GPA and in terms of SAT or ACT scores. So, if you have a 2100 on the SAT and, their 75th percentile cutoff is an 1800, it's probably a safety. It's not a guarantee, but there's a very good chance you'll get in. It's a medium if you're in the middle of that range. So, if you have a 725 and it's 700 to 750, it's a medium. And if you're below that, it's a reach. If you're significantly below it, it's sort of an impossibility. A lot of people say, should I submit an application just for the heck of it? Which is actually a question we'll get to later. And usually the answer is no. I mean, you can if you want to spend $65 an hours of your time and frustrate admissions officers. But, if you have a 1,500 total on all 3 sections on the SAT, and you don't have something truly special about your application, you're not getting into Harvard. It's just not going to happen. So, the basic idea is that you want to apply to about 12 schools, 4 reaches, 4 mediums, 4 safeties, spread things out and make sure that they're actually reaches, mediums, and safeties. There's another question here about for students who aren't able to afford tuition, but who may be able to qualify for aid. Now, I'm going to be fully honest. I am far from an expert on financial aid. So anyone who's tuning in today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you an introduction to someone I know who's an absolute genius on financial aid in every way, shape, and form, and also a couple of really great free online resources that'll help you to make these decisions because I don't want to ever give an answer to a question that I'm not fully qualified to answer. So that handles that as far as how many you should apply to. And that also goes to the next question. How can I position my daughter to apply to schools that will give her the most money? Some schools are kind of notorious for not giving very much financial aid to anybody. Some schools give a lot more money. And of course, if you apply to an in-state school, you're going to pay a lot less money overall anyway. So there are general ways to think about this. But again, anyone who's tuning in, I'm going to send you all the resources on financial aid after the fact, rather than kind of bloviate on something I'm not a full expert on. So the next question is, how much time is required to complete SAT review? And for example, if a student is planning to take the SAT on the 24th of January, will they have enough time to start the review course now and still benefit from the information, or should more time be allowed? So I'm assuming that this question is about my online SAT course, the Green SAT system. And in general, the answer to this question is kind of funny. It's the more, the better. When it comes to getting good at the SAT or the ACT, basically, you just want to look at it this way. You want to go in and you need to knock out 3 things. 1, material. Do you know all of the material that you need to understand? For instance, if you don't know how to find the area of a triangle, then you're not going to be able to find the area of a triangle. It doesn't matter how smart you are or how prepared you are for the test. You're dead when it comes to any problem that has you do that. So you need to find this material. Now, where do you stand, right? If you have no idea what 75% of the formulas you need to know are for the ACT math section, you need to do a lot of work. None of it's hard, but none of it's impossible to understand or even difficult to understand. It's just like learning Spanish, right? Is learning hola, mi amo Antonio difficult? No, but you have to do it. So it takes time, and the fewer words you know, the more you need to learn. That's really the simple way to look at it. The second thing is strategy. And strategy actually takes a little bit less time than material. And strategy is really things like, how do you approach the questions? Because on both the SAT and the ACT, they're very different exams, and they have different ways of messing with you so that they're not just pure application. And the very quick way to think about this is that the SAT is a puzzle, the ACT is a sprint. So basically on the SAT, they won't just ask you, here's an equation, solve it. They'll say a certain farmer has a truck and it drives at 32 miles per hour, but then, his miles per hour decreased by 15%, but the road decreases by 10%. And therefore, if you increase his oil efficiency by, etc., they're going to ask you really annoying questions. It's the same stuff as the equation, but it's really weird and it's tough to decipher. You need to know, how do you approach that? On critical readings, you need to know certain key strategies. For instance, do not select a right answer, kill wrong answers. This is stuff I teach in my online programs, but the basic idea is that if you try to prove something right, you're never going to be able to do it. And that's why both the SAT and the ACT reading sections are seen as so hard, even though you're fluent in English. And if you ever ask yourself, why is it that I'm fluent in English, I know how to read, and yet I read these English passages, read English questions, and can't answer them? It's because they're trying to mess with your head. So you need the right strategies. That takes a little bit less time. It depends on how quickly it clicks, but the final thing is application, right? You can have all the material knowledge, you can know all the strategies, and then you cannot be used to applying it during a real test. You might not know, how long does it really take you to complete each section? How quick are you doing certain things? So you need to fly through all this stuff. And hold on one second. Let me just my air. There we go. Basically, you need to kind of think about how long things are taking you. And it's a very, very personal process. So with that in mind, I usually think that the sweet spot is 3 months. Whenever I work with one-on-one students, I always say you should spend 3 months prepping, and then from there, you're pretty much ready. Some students, it might just be a little bit of a fine-tuning exercise. So, if you have a 2250 on the SAT, first of all, you don't really need to prep anymore. Anything above a 2250 is sort of a glory point, but it doesn't really need to happen. But if you have if you want to get a 2400, you might need, 3 weeks, but if you have a 1400 and you want to break a 2100, it might take you significantly more than 3 months. The key idea though, is that you want to get started as soon as possible and track your results, right? And see what you can get out of it. My online program, both the ACT and the SAT programs, are top loaded. And what I mean by that is that the most important, most essential strategic and material stuff is all up front. So some people only use my programs for about 10 days. They still see pretty big results. I've had kids go up 200, 250 points in a week just by learning the key strategies that I teach for the SAT, and 2 or 3 points on the ACT in a week just by learning the key strategies. And then as you go, it's more and more fine tuning, right? So just as when you move to Spain, the first thing you need to learn are the most common 250 words, right? I am, how are you, good day, goodbye, thank you. And then you learn words like bureau and idiosyncrasy later on, right? Those come after the fact. You can still get better, but they're kind of finer tuned and they're used less frequently. So I realize that's kind of a long answer, but it's a complicated question. But basically, if you can put in even 2 weeks, you're going to see significant improvements. Anything more than that, you're just going to compound the improvements. And the really key thing is that you track your results. We'll get to this later, but never take the SAT or the ACT just to see how you do. You can always figure it out pretty simply just by taking a diagnostic test. So the next question is, do you have any tips for students who tend to overthink ambiguous questions? That is a really, really interesting question. And of course, the SAT is a little more famous for ambiguous questions than the ACT, but both of them kind of butter their bread with this stuff, especially on the reading section, right? It's tough to have an ambiguous math question. It's very easy to have an ambiguous reading section, reading question. And basically, the thing that you need to think about here is that there's no way to prove something right, but it's very easy to prove something wrong. And, I always make kind of a silly analogy where, whenever my students are holding an SAT prep book like this, I say, what is this made of? And they say, paper. And I go, okay, prove it. And they're like, well, it bends. Yeah, great. Lots of things bend. Anything else? Well, it tears. Awesome. Lots of things tear. That doesn't prove that it's paper. You could spend all day looking at this thing and it wouldn't prove that it was paper. If it says printed on recycled paper up front, maybe they're lying, right? However, if I prove that it's not a fish, it's a little bit easier. Prove that this is not a fish. It doesn't have gills. And we're done. And I know that's a silly example, but the basic idea here is that it's really easy to prove stuff wrong. So for ambiguous questions, the reason that they're ambiguous is because you're trying to prove them right? So kind of my students will, when they first see these problems, spin their wheels. They're going, well, answer B is, it's good because of these reasons, but answer C, same as great for these reasons. And they're looking at all the ways that it is good. That's not what they need to be doing. You need to look at the objective, factual, quick reasons why the question is, or an answer choice is wrong, right? So let's say you read a passage and it's about how the invention of the printing press spread information, across the lands more quickly, right? It says, what's the main idea of this passage? And you're dealing with two answer choices. And one says, it's about, information in the modern age. And the other one is, it's about how a new thing accomplished something, right? At first you look and you say, well, the second answer, how a new thing accomplished something, sounds so bleh. It doesn't sound like there's any information there. Prove it wrong. You can't do it. What new thing? The printing press. What did it accomplish? It spread information effectively. And that's all there is to it. And you're finished. So if you look at the first one, right, it's about information, right? The spread of information, that's way too general. It's not about the spread of information. It's about the invention of the printing press and how it spread information. So by looking at errors rather than at virtues, you're going to be able to kill answers much more quickly. And suddenly things that seemed ambiguous become very simple. And by the way, this doesn't just work for reading. It also works for grammar. Sometimes my students will be looking at two sentences and they'll say, ma'am, B and C both seem so right to me. And I'll say, well, stop thinking about why they're right. Look at their differences and figure out which one's wrong. And suddenly they look at them and they say, oh my gosh, well, the second one has to be in present tense. It's in past tense. Wrong. That's all there is to it. So the second you start focusing on errors rather than focusing on virtues, that's when ambiguity just sort of starts to melt. And this is something that I kind of obsess over in my online programs. And for any of you who take them, you know that I'm sort of a broken record here. This is all I talk about because it's a really big, kind of cornerstone of the entire strategy. So the next question is, interesting. Is it ever worth applying to a college just to see what happens? If my GPA and scores are lower than they expect, is it still worth it? I touched on this earlier, but just to reiterate, no, not really. The only exception to this rule is if you have something that I like to call a red carpet voucher. And that's basically something unbelievably spectacular about your application that might transcend certain boundaries. And apologize if you hear the sirens in the background, by the way. That's the virtue of living in New York City. Anyhow, so let's say that you've published a novel, for instance, through a major publishing house. If you're a professional athlete, if you've won some international philanthropy award, and it's really kind of, just you have something that's really, really, really setting you apart, then you might be able to transcend things. And the other thing is, do you have a liaison? Is another question. And the main thing to ask yourself is, or the main thing way to figure this out is, if you know that you have one, you have one. And if you're not sure if you have one, you don't. It's kind of like that, if you have to ask, you can't afford it thing. So basically, if you're a recruited athlete, you have a liaison, the coach. He's going to go and he's going to go to the admissions committee and say, hey, John kicks a soccer ball like a Greek god. I need him on the team. They won't really care what your GPA is, right? He's pulling you in. If you don't have someone like that, or if you don't have some guy saying, oh my gosh, Jenny published a poem in the New Yorker, what a feat. If you don't have something like that, there's no point. Because again, this is how the application process goes. They look at your folder, they say, student 13,447, GPA below what we expect, SAT score below what we expect. Whop, that's it, right? And the thing here is that it's just a way for them to save time, right? They have thousands of kids applying, and they don't want to look at your DVD and look at your essays and look at your recommendations and then find out that you have a 1.1 GPA. It's inefficient. So they look at that stuff first. So again, I know it's bad news, but just remember that you're going to spend 4 years of your life at college. And while the name brand seems very important, it's way more important that it's just somewhere you want to attend. So do your research and find a place that's going to cherish you and that you're going to cherish. You really don't have to, go to Harvard or Princeton or Yale or Columbia to enjoy the college experience and get a ton out of it. But again, you're just going to waste admissions officers' time. You're going to waste your time, and you're going to waste your money, right? If you have a 2.1 GPA and you have 20th percentile SAT scores, don't apply to Yale. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just saying it because it's not going to happen. And that's basically the full answer to that one. So next up, can you explain the benefits of early admissions and the drawbacks? Well, that's a really good question. And it really has to do with the difference between early action and early decision. Early decision can be binding, and early action is generally not binding. And the difference is this, that if you deal with a binding early decision, then what it pretty much says is that you will go if you get in. It's pretty much a contract. So the advantage to that, a lot of people ask, why the heck would I ever do that, right? Why would I bind myself to one school? And there's actually a really interesting reason why you want to do that. And it's to prove to the school that you will go if they let you in. Most people are so caught up in the idea that they need to be good enough for the school that they forget that schools also have a very selfish, very serious motivation to make sure that anyone they let in actually attends. And a lot of people think that admissions percentage is the most important piece of ranking when it comes, or most important criteria when it comes to ranking a college. In fact, that's really not the case. There are actually a lot of schools that are way more competitive admissions percentage wise than Harvard, for instance. But there is a number that's even more important, and it's the ratio of people they let in to people they attend. Right. So Janssen and Janssen University, I'm making that up. They might, let in a ton of people and only 5% of them go. That's a really bad sign. Whereas you better believe that most people who get into Harvard end up going to Harvard. That's why it's Harvard. Right. And so this is really, 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 really important to them. And this is actually a reason why a lot of my students who have hyper competitive applications get flat out rejected from a ton of the lower ranked schools, right? So it's so funny. They get into a couple top 30s or top 20s, and then they get fully blown out of the water. They don't get into anything from, 200 to 50. And the reason is kind of funny if you think about it. The schools know that they're not going to go, right? If you apply to, number 283 college and you have a 4.3 weighted GPA with perfect SAT scores, you're the captain of the soccer team, you have incredible recommendations, and you published a novel, you're going to get in somewhere really, really, really good. So, they know you're not going to attend, so they actually reject you. So this early decision thing is telling the school, look, it's not just that I'm promising you that I'm going to go. I am going to go for a fact. This is a lock. So if you let me in, I'll come. This is important to them. Early action is, it's not binding, and you can apply to multiple early action schools at once. And there's something else that you need to keep in mind, which is that certain schools, and you need to look this up for each school. In my book, Why You Get Rejected, I talk about all the minutia of this. It's kind of, you can get pretty in depth. But basically, some schools, when they let you in, they need to know that you commit right then. Other schools have rolling admissions and allow you to wait until the spring, and you can decide then along with regular decision schools. So certain schools actually allow you to apply early action. They could let you in. You can still apply for the January deadline and then decide after the fact where you want to get in. The advantages are twofold. Aside from showing the schools that you're very interested, you're also getting it out of the way. And it's a stressful, annoying process. So it's not actually sort of like an application advantage per se, but it's a really, really valuable just psychological and lifestyle advantage. You're done with this horrific process, and make no mistake, this is it's not hard per se, but it's stressful and it's annoying, and you want to get it done. The disadvantages, you have less time to get your application ready, and that's a pretty serious disadvantage. And also, you're generally dealing with a way more competitive applicant pool. Generally, people have their act together. What's funny is that the October SAT, by the way, was not the case this year. If you weren't under a rock, you know that the October SAT was very, very difficult this year. But usually, it's actually seen as the quote unquote easier test, which, by the way, not to go off topic, but it shows you that you should never base your test on what people say about whether it's easy or hard compared to the applicant pool, because you never really know. But basically it had a reputation as being easier. The reason being that a lot of the people who took the October SAT were people who were seniors, and all of a sudden they went, oh crap, I need to take that SAT. They hadn't prepared, right? Whereas a lot of people who prepare and get rid of it early, they take care of it in June or in January because they've been prepping for it during the school year. So it's kind of a funny setup. But basically, you are going to be dealing with people who know their stuff, who usually have help, and who are very competitive when you apply early. So I've actually had college advisors that I work with, private advisors, tell my students, look, don't apply early, apply regular, because you're kind of competitive-ish early, but hyper competitive in the regular decision pool. And especially if, for instance, you can get stronger SAT subject test scores. So take the time, get stronger subject tests, and then apply regular. So you're less competitive and you have time to get your things together, write better essays, get higher subject test scores, get your AP scores in, maybe get that A that'll bring your GPA up a little bit, whatever you might need to do. So it's a complicated question. Again, I would really recommend checking out why you get rejected, looking online, researching which schools are early action, which schools are early decision, which ones are binding, which ones aren't, so that you know in depth based on where you want to apply, because it really does vary a lot by schools. And so you don't want to just kind of take generalities into account when you're doing it. So next up, what other resources can a student get to get good subject test scores after his college prep courses? So when it comes to subject tests, first of all, again, on testprepauthority.com, I have a full free guide on the SAT subject tests. So check it out. It's pretty comprehensive. And I also have a lot more information in my book, Why You Get Rejected. But basically, the number one thing you need to understand about subject tests is that they're not like the SAT one, and they're not like the ACT. There is zero strategy involved. The one exception to this rule is the SAT literature subject test. The SAT literature subject test, in my personal and professional opinion, is an absolute nightmare. It requires a ton of strategy. It's really, really hard. And it requires pretty much the same strategies that I teach for my critical reading strategies for the SAT one, but you also need to know a lot of kind of random literary and poetic terms, and you have to just have a good eye for literature in general. If you hate poems, don't take the SAT literature test. It's not worth it. There are other kind of humanities ones you can take, like the history tests, that are going to suit you a lot better. But that being said, for the most part, subject tests are very, very material based and very straightforward. So basically, the SAT, you might ask that crazy, miles per hour, weird, but the driver happened to be 15% less alert, but also the road was 25% more windy, blah, blah, blah problems. The subject tests give you an equation and they say, solve it. They give you a triangle and they say, find the area. They give you some SOHCAHTOA stuff and they say, what's sine here, right? What's cotangent? It's all purely straightforward. So you know your stuff or you don't. Same with history. They're not asking you really in-depth stuff. They're pretty much saying, who did this? What country did this, right? So it's flashcard stuff. So when it comes to programs and when it comes to tutoring, it's funny because, I usually tell people that the main thing is find source material, right? Get the official College Board book, which is, I think, $14, and they have actual problems that they ask. Get some other books. I really trust Barron's a lot of the time. They have some pretty good stuff. McGraw-Hill sometimes has good stuff. Go on Amazon, type in the subject test that you want to take, and find the book, get as many practice questions as you can, and then just study like a lunatic. If you still need help, right? And some things you might, chemistry, for instance, even though chemistry, the exam is kind of straightforward, I still was horrible at chemistry. I didn't like it. You might want someone to explain the concepts to you and show you how stuff works. And you might need a buddy to work through flashcards with you. But for the most part, just study it like you'd study vocabulary. Right? There's no strategy. You just need to work like a loon and you need to do it very consistently. But again, check out the guide on Test Prep Authority. That'll tell you everything you need to know about where to look for material and how to tackle each subject test. So next up, do American colleges accept the IB exam? And is it better to take the IB than the AP? As you may or may not know, the IB is really, really, really hard. It takes a lot of work. Some schools prefer it. Most schools actually prefer the IB to the AP. Some schools prefer the AP to the IB. Most schools do take IB into consideration. This is one, though, where you really want to just look it up. So go on Google, and if you're applying to, School X, type in School X, do they take IB? School X prefer IB to AB, and you'll find out. There's a million helpful forums, etc. And it really is an individual issue. Generally, IB is seen as harder. So if you do well on the IB exams, then they're kind of more valid and more impressive than the AP. But again, check the schools you're applying to. If you kind of go by generalities, you might have a very nasty surprise come application day or acceptance day, rather. So that's the answer to that one. Next up, we have, what is your suggested technique for handling the ACT reading section, which emphasizes speed and comprehension? Do you save the literary section for last? Do you write notes as a brief outline next to paragraphs as you read? Do you skim the passage? So I will not be a shill for my online program. The program was built to cover all of this strategy in extreme depth. But the very short answer is basically that when it comes to ACT reading in particular, it's actually very different from SAT reading. ACT reading is very referential. And what I mean by that is on the SAT, you'll almost never see a question that has something like, why did Julie go to the store, right? Or how many hats was the monkey wearing, right? They don't ask questions that are just research for the most part. They're very weird. If Juliana were lying about her reasons for going to the ball, what might the author of passage 2 say about Zoe's reasons for going to Joanna, right? It's all kind of nuts and very convoluted. The ACT is referential, right? The key to understand is that you're not going to know what they're going to ask you. They give you a ton of material and they only ask you about very little of it. So taking notes is a horrible idea during your reading. And the reason for this is that you might take notes and you might not use them and you blew your time. And the biggest thing to understand is that when it comes to ACT reading, time is everything. Time is absolutely everything. It's so unbelievably blisteringly paced, right? So you have 35 minutes for 40 questions, and that includes the 4 huge passages you need to read. And then each passage comes with 10 questions. So you have less than a minute per question after reading this passage. So here are your 2 goals really when it comes to reading this passage. 1, get through it and get the main idea. Why was it written? What does it say? What's going on? If you can answer that, you're going to be able to answer about 2 or 3 questions right off the bat without looking back. But for the most part, the thing you're trying to do is build a mental table of contents. And that's the second thing. And by a mental table of contents, what I mean is basically you need to start understanding where is this stuff in the passage so that when you read the questions, you can look back and find it quickly, right? So if they ask you a question like, why does Julie's grandma buy the cinnamon? Okay, that was right here. That's where the cinnamon part was. Whoop, look back, read it, and then go back, answer it first, and then kill the wrong answers, as we already discussed. For both the SAT and the ACT critical reading, you need to kill wrong answers rather than picking right ones. But really, the whole strategy is fly through, get the main idea, and figure out where stuff is so you can reference it later. If you try to thoughtfully digest an ACT reading section, you are dead. You just will not have any time left to answer the questions. And the questions aren't going to be asking the main idea stuff. They don't really care about your comprehension. They're going to be saying, what color was Mary's dress? Why did Julie leave the Shire? And you need to go back to the part where it explains that Julie was leaving, and it says Julie left the Shire because she found that the people were very provincial. And then one of the answers will be the people were very provincial in the Shire, right? So you have to look back. So just figure out where stuff is, get the main idea, and move on. There's a lot more to it, obviously. And again, to be a outrageous shill, I really get into this in serious depth in my online program. But that's the basic idea. Don't waste your time taking notes. Don't waste your time trying to digest. Fly through, go to the questions, reference, and answer. So next up, a big one, which is, how do I know whether to take the SAT or the ACT? So again, believe it or not, there is a free guide on Test Prep Authority that answers this question. And you really want to go through, or you're going to want to go through, and you're going to want to check out this whole thing because it is an in-depth process. But what's funny is that most students, you'll kind of know the answer to this already. And the way you'll know is this. Are you a deep ponderer, or are you kind of a slammer when it comes to your work? I always say that, the SAT is like sort of a ballet and the ACT is a sprint. The SAT is a game of chess and the ACT is a marathon. Basically it's like the SAT is just really, really slow, pondering, convoluted problems. You get a lot of time for each problem, and you really have to digest them, watch out for tricks, and really think deeply. Whereas the ACT, there aren't that many tricks, but boom, they're asked one after the other. There are no breaks. You're given almost no time. So are you the kind of person who can just sit down for 4 hours and just go? then the ACT would be great. If you have ADD or you get distracted easily, like I do, then you probably want to take the SAT. It's probably going to be a little bit better for you, but diagnostics are king here. So the really short answer is take a full-length diagnostic for the SAT, take a full-length diagnostic for the ACT, compare your scores using the concordance table. Again, this is all in the online guide on Test Prep Authority. Figure out which one you're better at, take that one and focus. And that's all there is to it. And again, do not study for both. Study for one. And one last thing, is one better than the other? Do colleges prefer one more than the other? No. And the hilarious thing is that it's very regional as far as what your opinions are going to be on these tests. I have people who are in Massachusetts or New York, and they go, my son, take the ACT. He's not some hippie, some idiot, right? And then I have people from kind of Ohio or from Texas, and they say, my daughter, take the SAT. She's not some sort of hippie idiot, right? Depending on where you're from, one test is sort of randomly typecast as hard, and one is typecast as like the easy bohemian one. Both are totally false. Any college, sees both as equals. A 2400 is a 36. Just take the one that you're going to get the better comparative score on and go with that. There is no favorite when it comes to college application committees. So next up, let me see. As a sophomore this year, is it wiser for me to take the SAT twice when the new one comes out, or should I take it twice in the first half of junior year when the old SAT is still in effect? Just in general, how should the class of 2017 deal with the new SAT? The new SAT, again, my favorite subject in the universe. Basically, it's sort of like the new Coke fiasco. If you know about the Coke versus Pepsi wars, kind of the College Board, I think, is making a huge mistake doing this. I don't really know why they're doing it, except that they're losing market share to the ACT, and they want to make their tests more like the ACT, and they're also bringing the scores back to the old 1600 point scale so that they can go back to the format that everyone seemed to know and love, even though they hated it. But basically, what do you do about this new SAT if you're in your sophomore year? Honestly, I would say just prep for the ACT or prep for the SAT right now and get it done. As I said, kind of right at the beginning of the program, you either want to just do this and get it over with, or you want to stick with the ACT if you're doing a longer term plan. So really the answer is this. Are you taking the SAT within the next 6 months? Take the SAT, it's fine. If you're taking any longer than that and kind of test prep is on the horizon, try focusing on the ACT instead. It's just more solid and you're going to know what to expect. That's sort of the short answer. The longer answer is use the guide on TPA, find out which one you should take. And then if it recommends the SAT, blast SAT prep now, take it, get it over with. And honestly, if it recommends the ACT, blast ACT prep, get it over with. I mean, if you're in 7th grade, you don't need to worry about it right now. Wait till after 9th grade to even begin. But if you're in 10th grade, you should be studying for these tests right now. Do not let this process wait. When parents call me and they say, it's the summer and they say my son's going into his senior year and he hasn't studied for the SAT yet, it's manageable. It's not ideal. It is far, 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 far from ideal. You don't want to be taking your backup SAT or your backup ACT as you're submitting applications. You want to be taking your backup SAT or your backup ACT your sophomore year when you still have 2 years left, and then you can focus on everything else. So the real answer to this question is start early. And if you're taking the SAT, get it out of the way right now. Otherwise, ACT. So next up. Oh, this is a very interesting one. How does social media play a role in college admission? Could it actually decrease chances of admission? Should I delete my social media account during the admissions process? So we've all heard the horror stories. Some student is kind of, on a table chugging a bottle of vodka and, an admissions committee sees it and boom, he's rejected. How did they find out? How much research are they doing? It varies by school, but when it comes to social media, I would just say this. Follow the grandma rule, okay? Would you post this and show it to your grandma in person on a card, right? If so, it's fine. If not, do not do it, right? Do you have a picture of you and your buddies on a hike? Post it, right? Are you saying, man, oh man, I just, watched a movie and it was really funny. Yeah, sure, post it. You'd say that to your grandma. If you have a picture of you doing something illegal, that's really stupid. Like, I don't even know what you're thinking. Don't put that on social media to begin with. And definitely yeah, just don't do it. I don't know why you would. If you say something potentially offensive or political even, right? Don't do it. I mean, I don't think anyone has made a lot of friends getting in political debates on Facebook. Political debate has its place. I don't think Facebook is the place for it. Same with Twitter, same with Instagram, same with Pinterest, same with everything. And even if it's edgy, right? I'm not trying to be some, old maiden here, right? If you have something that just says like, this football team sucks, right? Would you want to walk into your grandma's room and say that out loud? If not, just don't do it. And yeah, if you're applying to schools, maybe you want to disable your social media accounts if you have anything even borderline. So if your entire history of social media is grandma proof, cool. If it's not, probably take it down. You might really, really miss Facebook. It's so amazing. But otherwise, you might actually get more done and have a more successful college application anyway. So that's my answer to that one. Follow the grandma rule. And if in doubt, disable your accounts. So next up. And this is a big one. How should I go about writing my college essay? How do I express myself and tell them more about me if the essay prompt is a quote? So this is a really big one. And of course, again, for college essays, this is a huge topic. One thing to know, most colleges on their actual websites will show you admitted essays. So I would go type in Google, Johns Hopkins admissions essays successful, right? See what the first result is. They'll actually show you some essays that got kids in. Read them, learn from them. It'll be a very, very worthwhile experience, I promise you. But also in my book, Why You Get Rejected, I have a full guide on how to do this. If you want to check it out, there's more. You can get some free chapters on Test Prep Authority. But in the meantime, just know this. There are 3 things that your essay needs to accomplish, just 3 overall. The first is it needs to be interesting and it needs to be unique, okay? If you write an essay that anyone could write, then it's just not going to get any attention, right? If you write about how, I think that charity is good. Charity is very important. People who don't do charity are bad. And I think that charity is very, very nice. I like charity. Great, right? I do think charity is good. I spend a lot of my time contributing to charity, but no one is not going to write something like that. That's not unique in any way, shape, or form. So you might as well just be this blank slate, right? It's not unique to you. So it has to be you. And just ask yourself this when you're about to write it. Would anyone else in my grade possibly write this? If not, right, then it's great. Then it's really good. If they would, then maybe you should think of something else, okay? The second thing it needs to do is it needs to show that you're bringing something to the table, right, in a very kind of subtle way. And what I mean by that is basically not just, I am going to help Johns Hopkins by doing this and that. You don't want to be blatant. That's weird. But you want to show that you're into stuff. You want to demonstrate kind of a passion, right? So, basically, if you're trying to be a creative writer, you want your essay in some way or another to show that you are a good creative writer or that you're into creative writing and you have a passion for it and you might contribute it to the school, right? Don't just write some totally random essay that has nothing to do with what you're bringing to the table, right? That's kind of bad news. And finally, 3, make sure that it is college appropriate. Just in the sense that you don't want to be writing something and then have the college read it and realize that it's the totally wrong audience for your essay. Again, check out Why You Get Rejected. Go online, do a lot more research to find out more about this. But the thing that I want to harp on more than anything else is uniqueness. Make sure that it's unique to you. One thing that I talk about in my book and all my students is what I like to call the Martin Luther King essays or the World War II essays. And basically, a lot of essays will just say, my hero is Martin Luther King, right? And what's funny is Martin Luther King is an amazing guy, but he's a lot of people's hero. So the problem is that it's not unique to you. You're no different than the countless millions of people who worship and admire him, right? Find something that's different. For instance, I had a girl who was she was applying to Harvard and she wanted to be an artist. It was all she wanted to be, was an artist. And she wrote her essay about how she was a hoarder. So when she would walk down the street, she would see some Christmas tinsel on a tinsel tree that someone had thrown out, and she'd run and grab it and bring it back. And she had piles of buttons and tinsel and bottles and paint cans in her room. And her parents thought she was totally crazy. And she was like, but I can use everything for art. When I see that beautiful tinsel, who knows when 2 years from now, I might be able to use it for a mixed media painting or in a statue I build. So I never want to throw it away. She got in. I'm not saying that the essay got her in, but it was unique and it was beautiful and it showed that she was a real human being, right? Think about this when you write your essays. Even though her advisor and her parents thought the essay was crazy, I loved it because I knew that the big key is make it unique. Make it about you. Think of your unique, beautiful life experiences, your goals, your passions, your desires. Write something about that and just make sure it passes that main test. Could someone else write it? Don't write it. That's the biggest rule. And you can research a lot more on this later on, but we will go on to the next question, which is, my favorite. Is it better to take the SAT cold for the first time as a junior or prep first? I've been told not to in order to get a baseline, or just because I may score high enough without it. I need an 1800. For the love of God, do not take the SAT or the ACT cold. This is the worst idea in the world. Here's what's going to happen. You're either going to, best case scenario, find out that your score is high enough. That's usually pretty rare. Or you're going to find out where you really are and realize that you need to do a little bit of work. Now, there's a better way to figure out where you are. It is get the official book, right? So in the case of the ACT, voila, the real ACT prep guide. This is it. In the case of the SAT, and you'll see this thing is well worn, but the official SAT study guide by the College Board. Get these books, study them, set aside 4 hours, take a full-length, timed, graded exam. The books show you exactly how to grade the tests and figure out where you stand. The only thing is that when you're doing this, you want to be realistic about what your score is. So for instance, don't take it at midnight on an empty stomach because you're going to get a way lower score. You want to get a full night's sleep. You want to get 8 hours. You want to have a proper breakfast. You want to take a shower. You want to be sure you're in a silent environment. If you take a SAT on an airplane, no, you're not going to get a score that reflects how you're going to do. You want to take it, in your living room. All your siblings, your parents know to shut up, to get out of the room, and you're going to take this thing and really treat it like the real deal. Have a watch on your wrist, just like you're going to on the real test, and make sure that you follow the time guidelines and do not cheat. The idea is not to get the best score possible. It's to find out where you're actually scoring. Now, most of my students, when they take these diagnostics, they give them a very, very accurate idea of where they're going to be. Most of my SAT students score within about 80 to 100 points total. I mean, on all 3 sections. Aggregate from where they're going to be. So if you get a 2000, you're probably going to get somewhere between a 19 and a 2100. On the ACT, 1 point. So if you get a 33, you're probably going to get a 32 to a 34. If you get a 27, you're going to get somewhere from a 26 to a 28. Use the official books to figure out where you stand. Do not use actual tests as diagnostics. It's a really, really, really bad idea. A lot of people say, well, we're just going to have our daughter take the test for the heck of it. Why would you ever do that? You're just going to have an official score down that is probably not going to be where you want it to be. So the worst case scenario of taking a practice test in these books is that, oh no, you wasted 4 hours finding out that you're already really good. Most likely you're going to take it and you're going to go, oh gosh, I need a 2000 and I have a 1700. Thank goodness I didn't log the 1700 in the official books. One thing you do want to keep in mind, a lot of people are really scared of taking lots of SATs or lots of ACTs. You don't have to be horrified of it. It's not that big of a deal, right? Obviously, there's sort of an invisible fine line of weirdness. Like if you've taken the ACT 9 times, that's insane. But there would be no reason to do it because you're already going to know where you're standing. The ideal amount of times I usually recommend to my students is 2. So usually I just have my students take a backup test, both for insurance and for statistical variance. The SAT super scores, some schools super score the ACT, but in any case, just take the test twice, ideally, because then you'll be able to kind of go in and you might be having a better day one day. Or the vocab on the SAT might be really hard for you on one test, all words you randomly don't know, and all words you do know on the next one. You never know what it's going to be, so just make sure that you take 2 tests to optimize your score, or you might get a concussion the day before the test. Your girlfriend might dump you the Wednesday before the test, right? You might get a cold. Who knows what could happen? But just be sure to register for 2. If you've already taken 2 or more, it's not the end of the world, but it does look weird if you take a ton. And the biggest thing is you don't have to. It's stressful, it's time consuming, and it's pointless. You can figure out where you're scoring on diagnostics, and then you can go in and take a test when your diagnostics are at the level you want them to be. Again, my online programs show you for both the SAT and the ACT exactly how to take a practice test, how to track your scores, etc. But even if you're just doing this on your own, just be sure that you're doing this before you go in. Do not take them cold. That would be the definitive and very short answer. Next up. And I already kind of got to this one, but if I don't have time to complete your online program, what should I do? How can I get the most out of it without skipping the sections I need to take? So if you're taking my online course, the basic idea is that it is a self-guided course that kind of stacks based on the work that you need to do. And I will be very quick on this one because, again, I don't want to shill on my programs, but basically, just skip the stuff that is your best and focus on the stuff that is your worst. The key idea here is that you're always going to be able to most easily gain points where your score is the lowest. So, for instance, if you have a 750 in math, a 750 in writing, and a 400 in reading, you should be spending all of your time on reading. You're going to get very, very, very incremental score improvements spending time on math and writing. Not to say that you shouldn't try and improve them, right? The higher, the better, but you're going to get way, 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 way more out of studying your worst stuff. So, my program, and this is a big thing to understand about how it's set up. Both the SAT and the ACT program are in sets. They're called days, but they should be more realistically thought of as sets. 45 sets each of assignments you have to work through. And at the end of 45 sets, you're done with kind of the program in general. Of course, you can extend things. On the 45th day, it shows you how to keep the program going, to infinity if you want to, and keep improving your skills and using the drills you've learned in the program and the exercises and strategies to continue improving. But if you can't get through all 45 sets, then what I'd really recommend is focusing on the beginning stuff first, on the subjects that matter most to you. On the subjects where you're scoring the lowest. So, if you have a 700 in math and a 600 in writing and a 600 in reading, cut the math out if you only have 15 days and just do reading and writing leading up. The only thing, and this is very specific, that you want to make sure of is that you look at day 45 up front, because it shows you how to prepare for the day before, the night before, the morning of, and the day of the test itself. You really, really, really don't want to miss that stuff. It's extremely important. And it's going to help you to really optimize your mind and body. And of course, also just be sure that no matter what, the week before your test, you are getting 8 hours of sleep every single night on the same schedule. So do not sleep until 1 p.m. The day before the test. It might seem great, like you're getting lots of extra sleep, but you're actually throwing off your cycle and you're going to feel like death when you wake up on Saturday. So make sure that you're getting consistent, plentiful sleep leading up to the test and focus on your weakest points. That's going to be the most important thing for you to do. So next up, the last one. I wanted to ask you that the pattern for the SAT is changing. So will the preparation also change, and will we have to study all over again for the new SAT? Also, and this is the big one, what's the validity of the SAT? I'm 14, I'll turn 15 next year. And hold on 1 second. Someone is at my door. Of course, the problems of doing a live event. 1 sec. Yes. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Aha. The UPS guy had to come in and ruin an otherwise flawless performance. All right, so what you want to keep in mind is that there have been mixed messages on whether the SAT will be valid. It's going to be valid. The old SAT scores will be valid if you take them within 5 years of applying to college. So the most important thing that you want to know is basically just that when you take this thing, make sure that you are kind of getting the SAT out of the way if you have to, or just, focusing on the ACT. But if you've taken the SAT already, or if you're planning on taking it now and you're not applying for a year or two, you're going to be totally fine. It's still going to be valid. SAT scores are valid for 5 years. Some college board reps have intimated that they're going to be putting more emphasis on the new SAT. That's not going to be the case from everything that I have understood. So looking at the list, it looks like everything has been handled. There are a few other questions that are kind of more specific to individuals that I don't think would be good for the group. So if you kind of have asked me a question online and I haven't gotten to it yet, that pretty much means that it's going to be answered by email directly to you. And again, by the way, one really important thing to understand is that if you ever want a question answered like this, you can always go and just email info@testprepauthority.com and have the subject line office hours. I'll answer it next week. I'm always going to be chopping up the office hours, sending all the different answers to everybody. So you'll always be able to reference this stuff later. But also you can just email support at greensatSystem.com. If you have any questions that you kind of specifically want answered for yourself, if you have any questions about my online SAT or ACT program, anything like that, just get in touch. The whole thing that I really want to emphasize is that this is a really open process. I really want to help out. So if you have anything on your mind, just get in touch and I will be there to assist. Again, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the first office hours. Apologies for the UPS delivery interruption right at the end. And, apologies for any technical glitches you might have been dealing with. As we kind of get more and more used to doing this, we're going to have a lot more fancy stuff going on. We're going to have more Q&A options. We'll be able to actually have live conversations going on. I'll be able to draw awesome images on my face during the presentation. Who knows how high tech we could get. But for now, again, thank you so much for joining. This has been a lot of fun. And again, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to get in touch. And if you didn't get to see all of this, don't worry. I'm going to be recording everything and sending it out to everyone. So you'll be able to access the entire presentation with annotations by tomorrow. Thanks so much again for joining. And hopefully I'll hear from you soon.